Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth, almost 9 kilometers of rock reaching up until the air runs out. Now picture dropping the whole thing into the ocean, summit and all. In one spot on this planet, it would vanish. The peak would still sit about 2 kilometers underwater, and nothing on the surface would ever hint it was down there. That spot is real. It has a name, a depth, and a temperature just above freezing. Fewer than 30 people in all of history have ever reached the bottom of it. For most of the space age, more people had walked on the moon than had ever touched it. So how deep is it really? Deep enough that sunlight gave up kilometers above. Deep enough that the water itself presses down hard enough to crush a submarine like a soda can. And somehow, impossibly, things live down there. Welcome to Geo Wonder. By the end, you'll understand exactly what the deepest point on Earth is, how it got there, and why the strangest thing about it isn't the depth at all. Most people, when they think of the bottom of the ocean, picture flat sand and darkness, a quiet floor a few kilometers down. And for most of the ocean, that's roughly right. The average depth is under 4 kilometers. But the place we're going is nowhere near average. It's in the western Pacific, east of the Philippines and south of Japan, in a long scar on the seafloor called the Mariana Trench. The trench itself stretches over 2,000 kilometers, a crescent-shaped gash you'd never see from a boat. At its lowest point sits the Challenger Deep, and lowest doesn't quite cover it. Surveys put the floor there somewhere around 10,900 meters below the surface. That's close to 11 kilometers straight down. The exact figure shifts a little every time someone remaps it, because measuring the bottom of the ocean is brutally hard. But every measurement agrees on the important part. This is the deepest spot on the planet. Let that number breathe for a second. 11 kilometers. If you could somehow stand at the bottom and look up, the surface would be almost 7 miles overhead. A commercial jet cruises lower than that. You are farther below the waves than a plane is above the ground. So the obvious question is why? Why is there a hole this deep in the ocean floor when the rest of it is relatively flat? What could carve something 11 kilometers down? The answer is that nothing carved it. It's being pulled down. And that changes everything about how you picture this place. The Earth's outer shell is broken into enormous plates that grind against each other, slowly over millions of years. In the western Pacific, 2 of them meet, the Pacific Plate on one side, the smaller Mariana Plate on the other, and where they collide, the Pacific Plate loses. Because it's older and colder and heavier, the Pacific Plate bends downward and slides underneath its neighbor, sinking back into the hot interior of the planet. Geologists call this subduction. Where the plate begins its dive, the seafloor gets dragged down with it, folding into a deep V. That fold is the trench. The Challenger Deep is simply the deepest kink in it. So this isn't a wound that's healing. It's an active machine. The trench is deep because one slab of the planet is being swallowed by another, right now a few centimeters a year. Slow enough that you'd never feel it. Relentless enough to build the lowest point on Earth. And it's been at it for a very long time. The Pacific Plate diving here is some of the oldest ocean floor on the planet, which is exactly why it's heavy enough to sink. Older, colder, denser rock loses the fight every time. The trench is basically the drain the old seafloor disappears into. And that's also why it sits where it does. Subduction zones ring the Pacific, and they come with earthquakes and volcanoes, the so-called Ring of Fire. The Challenger Deep is one extreme end of that same violent seam. Now let's actually go down into it, because the trip is stranger than the destination. Start at the surface in warm sunlit water. Drop a few hundred meters and the light fades to a deep blue. Past 1,000 meters, it's gone completely. From there to the bottom, another 10 kilometers. There is no sunlight at all. None. It's a darkness the surface world never experiences. The temperature falls with it. Down at the floor, the water hovers just above freezing, roughly 1 to 4 degrees Celsius. Cold, black, and still. But the cold and the dark aren't even the dangerous part. The dangerous part is the weight. Every meter of water above you is pressing down, and by the time you reach the bottom of the Challenger Deep, that pressure is over 1,000 times what you feel standing on a beach. More than 1,000 atmospheres. Somewhere around 8 tons pushing on every square inch. Think about what that actually means. It's the weight of a large truck balanced on a single fingernail everywhere on your body at once. An ordinary submarine sent down there wouldn't spring a leak. It would be crushed flat in an instant, like stepping on an empty can. This is one of the most hostile environments a human being can physically travel to, and it's on our own planet. That's the barrier that kept us out. We reached the top of Everest in 1953, and climbers have stood there thousands of times since. The bottom of the Challenger Deep is the opposite story. Getting there means beating the pressure. And for most of history, we simply couldn't build anything strong enough to try. Which makes what happened in 1960 sound almost insane, because that's when 2 people decided to go there in person. Their vessel was called the Trist, and it looked nothing like a sleek submarine. It was basically a huge float filled with gasoline, because gasoline resists compression, with a tiny steel sphere bolted underneath for the crew. Inside that crammed ball of metal sat Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh. The descent took them nearly 5 hours. Down through the blue, through the black, into pressure that no craft had ever survived. At one point, a pane of the outer window cracked with a bang that shook the whole vessel. They kept going anyway. And then, almost 11 kilometers down, the Trieste touched the bottom of the Challenger Deep. 2 men sitting at the lowest point on Earth in 1960, before anyone had walked on the moon. Here's the detail that sticks with me. When they landed, they stirred up a cloud of silt and had to wait for it to settle. And as it cleared, reported seeing what looked like a flatfish drift past the window. Even now, whether it was truly a fish is debated, but the claim mattered because it hinted at something people didn't expect, that even down here in the crushing dark, something might be alive. After that dive, the deepest place on Earth went almost completely untouched for over 50 years. Then, in 2012, filmmaker James Cameron built his own vertical submarine and made the descent alone, becoming the first person to reach the bottom solo. In 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo went down and stayed for hours, mapping the floor, and with him, the picture of what lives there finally came into focus. That picture is the strangest part of this whole story, because life is down there. not thriving exactly, but present and stubborn in a place that by every rule should be sterile. And the deeper we look, the weirder it gets. Start with the ones you could almost recognize. Amphipods, small pale crustaceans a bit like shrimp, scuttle across the floor in surprising numbers, scavenging whatever drifts down from above. They've adapted their very chemistry to keep from being crushed. They belong to the deep in a way we never could. Then there are the snailfish. Soft, pale, almost translucent, they hold the record as some of the deepest living fish ever filmed, cruising thousands of meters down where you'd swear no backbone could survive. They have no armor. Their bodies simply don't fight the pressure. They let it pass straight through them, inside and out, balanced against the weight. That's how you survive down here. Not by resisting, by surrendering. But the creature I keep coming back to barely counts as a creature at all. On the floor of the trench live xenophyophores. Each one is a single cell. One cell. And yet some of them grow to the size of your hand. Giant single-celled organisms, sitting in the deepest cold dark on the planet, doing something we still don't fully understand. And beneath even them, in the mud and the rock, there are microbes, living off chemicals seeping up from the sinking plate, with no sunlight anywhere in their world. No connection to the surface we live on. Whole communities running on the raw chemistry of the planet itself. Some scientists think environments like this may be close to how life on Earth first began. Which flips the whole thing around. This place that looks like the least hospitable spot imaginable might be a window into where we all came from. So think about what the Challenger Deep actually is. It's the deepest point on the entire planet, deeper than Everest is tall. It exists because one plate is sinking beneath another, right now, dragging the seafloor down with it. It's colder than a refrigerator, darker than anything on the surface, and pressurized enough to crush almost anything we build. Only a few people have ever reached it, and yet it's crawling with life that found a way when it had no business surviving at all. And here's the part that gets me. We have mapped the surface of Mars in sharper detail than we've mapped the floor of our own oceans. The Challenger Deep has been visited a handful of times, but the trenches of the world are still mostly blank on our charts. There are almost certainly creatures down there no human has ever seen, in the last truly unexplored wilderness left on Earth, and it's been right beneath us the whole time. So let me ask you this. We've now gone to the highest point on Earth and the lowest. But there are other extremes still waiting. Where do you want to go next? The hottest place on the planet, where the ground can cook an egg, the coldest, where a breath freezes before it lands, or the most remote spot on Earth, the one patch of ocean farther from land than anywhere else? Tell me in the comments and I'll take us there. Next time, we're heading somewhere the temperature does the impossible. A place so hot it barely seems survivable, and yet people live right beside it. If there's a deepest point on Earth, there's a hottest one too. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.